Hello, class, and welcome to Week 5, Brain, Body, and Spirit, and Learning and Embodied Strategies. So this week, we're not going to focus so much on additional strategies since you have so many great ones in the text, but instead, I'm going to give you a little bit of the science and philosophy behind these strategies. And you'll see that it's not just esoteric, but it's right in the heart of the science of learning. So how did we come to the idea that brain, body, and the spirit were not really a part of learning? Well, we have to go back several hundred years to our friend, the great French philosopher René Descartes, who really did posit that there was a divide between the mind and the body. This is the classical dualism, where the mind could be free, indestructible, indivisible, yet the body was determined and divisible and destructible. And these were two separate things that could go back and forth and interpret one to the other in a confusing fashion, I must admit, but that they were essentially two distinct systems. We know now, through advances in cognitive science and neuroscience, that there are not two distinct systems, but rather they both exist in the human experience, and that the mind really does emerge from the body. Let's look at what we now know about the relationship between the mind and the body. Now we know that there are physical stimuli that exist in the body, such as different experiences in your own physical body, as well as outside the body. And these are the starting point of thought. The human brain has certain regions that are dedicated to solely attending to and mapping those body stimuli. Also, the human brain has components that only will register and map object stimuli. When these two maps, which are what called first order maps, are combined, they create what is called a second order map, which is really the core consciousness. We have evidence that humans and many mammals have the capacity of this core level of consciousness. Now, what sets humans apart is the ability to take these second order maps, core consciousness maps, and encode them into long-term memory, especially efficient with the processes of language. And these stored second order maps then become an object that our body can relate to. In a sense, we can have an experience of ourselves with our own thoughts or feelings emotions that have been stored by previous experience. And this is the extended level of consciousness that's really only typically seen in humans. So that's why the great neuroscientist Antonio Damasio suggests that Descartes was in error, that we don't have two separate systems of mind and body, but rather it is one system that arises in the human experience. So the implication is that learning is not solely a mental activity, but it involves the whole person and the whole experience, both mentally, physically, relationally. Here's an amazing image of the complete human nervous system. So we can't think that a thought just exists in the brain. The brain itself is part of a complex system, which is self-integrated with other complex systems in the human experience. So learning is not just mental, it is not just a matter of the brain, but of the whole person, their thoughts, feelings, and emotions. So these thoughts, feelings, and emotions are not distinct from one another, but yet they are more like magnetic fields that operate with force and exert influence one to the other. And these things exist in two levels of ourself. One, philosophers and scientists can call the me self, which is more of that unconscious self, which is the self as an object, a potential for action, a resource from which to draw on that really does change quite slowly over time. So the other self, the I self, which is the more conscious self, arises from that me self. And it, in contrast, is subjective. It is actual. It is in use, and it rapidly changes, actually from breath to breath. As the philosopher William James said, the stream of consciousness. And we know that the force of that unconscious self is determining that big red arrow many aspects of our actual conscious experience. But it's also possible, with intention and effort, to take that conscious experience and then reshape, reform that me self. But it's difficult, and that's why the arrow is showing quite faint and small in comparison. So many of the strategies for embodied learning and brain and body and spirit and learning you'll read about are efforts of using that conscious self to go and reshape that unconscious me self. Now, I promised I wasn't going to be giving you a lot of strategies this time, but I did want to share with you this one resource from contemplativemind.org. Here you'll see the tree of contemplative practices which are designed to build that awareness, communion, and connection through different kinds of strategies. And if you do go to this page and search this table, you'll see many of these are links to actual practices that you might like to incorporate in your own practice. So I hope you've enjoyed this brief tour of some of the philosophy and science behind the brain, body, and spirit and embodied strategies.